Hi, this is Steven from Adventurers Dispatch, and I'm trying to bring you all the best news that's out there in the world of LARP. What's available, what's on waitlist right now, and what might be exciting news coming down the pike. Now, while researching practically almost all the other videos I've done, I've come across this phrase, Nordic LARP, that I kind of had a sense of. I sort of thought I knew what it meant, but I wasn't exactly sure. Like, where did it come from? When did the whole idea of it start? How has it affected other LARPs? So I decided to do a little bit of research and really delve into what Nordic LARP is. Now, some LARPs are built on adventures. You show up, you grab your gear, you pick a side, and you go chase the story. Then there are games that feel less like adventures and more like stepping into somebody's skin and borrowing it for a while. Where silence matters, where relationships matter, where the point isn't whether you win or lose a buff battle, but whether what happened feels true. That's where Nordic LARP comes in. And despite the name, Nordic LARP isn't just a game made in Sweden, although that's what I thought for a while. It's really a design philosophy, one that treats live-action roleplay as a serious creative medium, not just a hobby built around quests and foam swords. Today I want to talk about what actually makes a Nordic LARP Nordic, why that style has had such an outsized influence on the hobby, and what even traditional fantasy players can learn from it. Nordic LARP can be confusing at first because the name sounds purely geographic. It makes it sound like we're just talking about games from Sweden, Norway, Denmark, or Finland. Or is that, oh, yeah, I guess that's all of them. What people usually mean when they say Nordic LARP is a design tradition that came out of those countries. A philosophy of play that puts immersion, emotional honesty, and shared storytelling at the center. So this is less about passports and more about approach. A game in New Jersey can borrow Nordic techniques. A game in Stockholm can still feel traditional and quest-driven. The term stuck because that's where the movement took shape, but what matters is the mindset behind it. In the 1990s and early 2000s, LARP scenes in Nordic countries started pushing in a different direction. Instead of focusing mainly on rule systems, combat resolution, and adventure structures, many designers began asking bigger questions. What if roleplay could feel more emotionally truthful? What if the experience itself was the point? What if discomfort, intimacy, or moral tension were not bugs, but perks? Part of the design. This led to games that were often smaller, more intentional, and more experimental. Some explored family breakdowns, some explored class divisions, some explored war, grief, fear, or identity. The point wasn't escapism in its usual sense. It was to step into a situation deeply enough to understand it from the inside. One of the biggest reasons Nordic LARP became a coherent movement was a conference called Knutpunkt. Depending on which Nordic country that hosted it, the name changed slightly, Knutpunkt, Nudpunkt, or Knutpunkt, but it was essentially all the same annual gathering. It began in the late 1990s as a place where designers, organizers, and players could compare notes. And that mattered enormously, because instead of people just making strange, interesting games in isolation, they started talking to each other about why they were making them. Knutpunkt helped establish shared language around immersion, player responsibility, consent, and safety, emotional design, narrative structure. It also normalized the idea that LARP could be discussed like theater, literature, or film. People published essays, they debated philosophy, they wrote post-mortems about what worked and what didn't work in certain games, and that helped transform Nordic LARP from a bunch of cool experiments into a recognizable design culture. The goal in Nordic LARPs is often not to win, but to experience something meaningful. And this is probably the biggest shift in mindset. A lot of traditional game design asks, how do we create challenge, reward, progression, and stakes? Nordic LARP often starts with a different question. What do we want people to feel, understand, or confront? And that changes everything. Success may not mean beating the villain. It may mean surviving an awkward conversation honestly, sitting with grief instead of avoiding it, supporting somebody else's big emotional scene, letting your character fail in a way that feels human. In other words, the emotional truth of the moment matters more than winning. Immersion gets used as a buzzword all the time, but in Nordic LARP, it usually means something deeper than just cool costumes. It's about reducing the distance between you and the experience. That can mean believable environments, in-character social norms, fewer visible game mechanics, slower pacing that lets scenes breathe. The goal is to help you stop performing a character and start inhabiting one. For any of you actors out there, it's sort of the difference between Sanford Meisner and The Method. You can see where my loyalties lie. Immersion is a priority. End of sentence. In Nordic LARPs, conflict exists to deepen experience, not to produce winners. In a lot of LARPs, conflict is something you try to solve. In Nordic LARP, conflict is often something you explore. That's a huge difference. A fight with a friend, a betrayal, a hard truth. These are not obstacles to clear, they're often the point. This style tends to embrace vulnerability, ambiguity, imperfect endings, emotional fallout, because real life rarely wraps up neatly, and Nordic LARP often wants to feel closer to life than fantasy does. Also, collaboration is valued over competition. Players are expected to help create good scenes for each other. One of the healthiest things Nordic LARP normalized is the idea that everyone at the table, or in the field, is partially responsible for everyone else's experience. Two phrases often associated with this mindset are play to lift and play to lose. Play to lift means helping make other people's scenes stronger, giving them emotional material, supporting tone, and helping moments land. Not undercutting tone for like a cheap laugh here or there. Play to lose doesn't mean sabotaging yourself. It means not protecting your character from every setback just to preserve status. Sometimes the most memorable thing you can do is let yourself be wrong, let yourself be vulnerable, let your plan fail in an astonishing, interesting way. Because a good story often feels the need for friction. And in Nordic design, emotional truth usually matters more than personal triumph. It's less, how do I win this scene, and more, how do we make this scene land? Now, as far as intentional design goes, Nordic games are often built around specific emotional or thematic goals. A Nordic LARP usually knows what kind of emotional space it wants to create. Maybe it's social pressure, political compromise, grief, fear, intimacy, longing, fear of intimate longing. And the mechanics, if there are mechanics at all, are often there to support that goal. That's why workshops, calibration exercises, and tone setting matter so much. They're not fluff, they're part of the design architecture. One of the biggest surprises for players new to Nordic design is pace. The games can feel quieter, slower, less externally busy, and that's intentional. A glance across a room, a pause before somebody answers, a shared meal with tension underneath it. Those moments are often where the real play lives. You're not waiting for the next quest marker. You're paying attention to what's happening in the moment, what's happening now. Small moments sometimes matter more than spectacle, and a character's interior life matters. In many Nordic-style games, what your character feels matters just as much as what they do. That means fear can matter, hesitation can matter, guilt can matter, affection can matter. The internal arc is not invisible side content. It's often the heart of the experience. Bleed. The ideas spawned from Nordic LARPs have also just coincidentally bled over into our LARPing vocabulary as a whole. For instance, it's helped popularize language for emotional crossover, or the idea of bleed. Bleed is when feelings cross between player and character. Maybe your character's grief hits something personal in you, tension in a scene genuinely rattles you, affection between characters creates warmth between players. That can be powerful, sometimes cathartic, sometimes unexpectedly intense. Nordic LARP didn't invent emotional crossover, but it did help give the hobby better language to talk about it responsibly. Now, the tools that make it work. Workshops, safety and calibration tools, debrief and aftercare. As for workshops before the play, you should understand that prep is part of the game. Nordic LARP often starts before the game officially begins. Pre-game workshops help players establish trust, understand tone, build relationships, and practice boundaries. This makes deeper play safer and smoother. Safety and calibration tools enable depth, not fragility. Nordic play has helped normalize modern LARP safety culture with tools like cut and break, quick ways to stop or soften a scene if something feels overwhelming or safe, okay check-ins, simple gestures or verbal cues to make sure another player is still comfortable in the moment, and traffic light systems, green, yellow, red, shorthand to communicate comfort levels of intensity. Consent discussions, clear conversations beforehand about touch, emotional limits, and boundaries. These are not there because players are weak, they're there because deeper emotional work requires better trust. And they also help in making the game as enjoyable as it can be. One example, last year I was doing a run of Eclipse by Chaos League, and I had built a character who was basically a psychopath. He was a compulsive liar in every way. And I built the character so that I get discovered by the end of the first night of play, and then deal with the emotional outcome of that on the final day of play. So everything was going great, and towards the end of the day of the first day, I was discovered as the compulsive lying bastard I was, and everybody I knew within the game, all my characters' friends, all turned against me, and I was totally ostracized. Which then I realized that there was still yet a whole night to play. What I did was to do a quick check with friends, my friends in the game, and I told them that basically everything was going great, but I didn't like the position that I was in, that I was going to have to play the rest of the night, which included a big party in character. I was going to have to do that all on by myself, and I didn't like the feeling of being ostracized, and I didn't like that position that I was in. So they actually helped accommodate me and sped up their forgiveness arcs a little bit quicker, so that actually took place over the course of the evening as opposed to happening the next day. Which then freed up the next day to something totally surprising and interesting that occurred. So a powerful game can leave feelings behind. Many Nordic events include structured debriefs, talking through scenes, stepping out of character, grounding yourself again, spending a few hours the day after the LARP with organizers talking through a system of getting in touch with your true self and trying to separate from the character you've established. That's not overthinking, that's good design. So how do Nordic LARPs differ from other styles? Well, blockbuster LARPs have huge special effects, set pieces, and feel like you're walking onto a movie set because sometimes you actually are. Whereas Nordic play often trades scale for emotional precision. Nordic LARPs can feel smaller, but sometimes more intimate and intense. Neither is better, they just aim at different kinds of satisfaction. And quite frankly, I prefer when there's a combination of both. That's kind of my jam, where the sets and narratives are elaborate, but what turns out to be important is the one-on-one small moments and connections you make with others amidst those larger influences. The set pieces and effects only make those small moments all the more real for me. Then there are parlor LARPs. There is overlap, but Nordic design often goes further in embodiment. Parlor LARPs often prioritize character and social scenes too, but Nordic design tends to put even more emphasis on full emotional buy-in, physical presence, environmental tone, shared intentionality. And as for festival campaign LARPs, well, festival LARPs and campaign games can feel huge and thrilling and alive. And yes, you can build strong character and have unique smaller moments, but sometimes all of that is lost once the boffer weapons are drawn or the entertainment begins. So Nordic LARP is one branch of a wider hobby. It's not better, it's just different. And this is important. Nordic LARP is not the evolved version of roleplay. It's just one very influential branch. But its influence is felt everywhere nowadays. A lot of games that feel modern, emotionally aware, and consent-forward are using tools Nordic designers help normalize. So why does it matter even if you never play one? Well, it changed the hobby. Nordic LARP expanded what LARP could be. It helped prove that LARP could be art, a type of emotional exploration, a social experiment, collaborative storytelling that widen the ceiling for everyone. And even if you never attend a Nordic-style game, its lessons matter. It teaches listening, scene support, generosity, emotional awareness, and those things make every style of play better. Nordic ideas are already shaping the games people play today. A lot of modern games now borrow from this tradition, even when players don't realize it. So understanding Nordic LARP is really about understanding how the hobby has matured. Nordic LARP asks a different question than a lot of games out there. Not can you win, but what are you willing to feel? What are you willing to reveal? What might you understand differently if you stay in the moment long enough? That's not for everyone, and it doesn't have to be. But whether you play blockbuster fantasy, parlor intrigue, or post-apocalyptic weekend games, Nordic LARP helped make this hobby deeper, safer, and more expressive. And when the term Nordic LARP gets bandied about, know that it has a rich legacy worth understanding.